Ryan Mitchell grabbed the posted list, scanned it once, then laughed so loudly every conversation in the facility stopped cold. He stabbed his finger at one name. Sophia Bennett. He turned to the crowd of soldiers behind him. "They're sending us a woman." The laughter that followed wasn't just his. It rolled across the entire assembly area like a wave. Nobody noticed that Sophia was already standing 10 feet away. She heard everything, every word, every laugh. And she said nothing. She simply looked at Ryan Mitchell and waited. If you've never seen someone get silenced by pure stillness, you're about to understand exactly what that looks like. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. I promise you it is worth every minute. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Because what happened at Iron Harbor was not just a competition, it was a reckoning. Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, Iron Harbor, sat on the edge of a coastline that had seen more pain, more failure, and more transformation than most people would ever understand. The salt in the air was permanent. The ground was packed hard by decades of boots' blood and sweat. There was no soft edge to any corner of that facility. Everything about it communicated one thing: this place does not forgive weakness. The annual Special Operations Readiness Challenge had been running for 11 years. It was not a public event. There were no cameras from civilian news networks, no reporters, no outside audience. The only people there were operators, instructors, support staff, and commanders, over 500 of them, and every single one of them understood what the challenge represented. Your performance there followed you. It was referenced in evaluations. It shaped how people spoke about you in rooms you were never invited into. Win it cleanly, and your career moved differently. Fail publicly, and the story attached itself to your name like a scar. Commander Ryan Mitchell had competed 3 times. He had won all 3. He was 39 years old, built across the chest and shoulders like someone who had spent more time underweight and in open water than behind any desk. 19 years of service. 3 combat deployments. 2 letters of commendation. 1 presidential unit citation that he kept framed not in his office, but in the hallway outside his office where everyone who walked past it would see it. He had trained hundreds of operators. He had broken down recruits who thought they were ready and rebuilt them into something harder. His reputation at Iron Harbor was not just respected. It was the kind of respect that came packaged with fear, because everyone knew the man didn't draw a line between respect and performance. If you couldn't perform, he didn't have patience for you. That was simply the truth of who he was, and the facility had organized itself quietly around that truth for years. The morning the competitor list was posted, Ryan was the first one there. He had a coffee in one hand, and the kind of relaxed confidence that came from knowing he was going to win before the thing even started. He scanned the names with the speed of a man who knew almost everyone on the list. Former students, current colleagues, a couple of instructors from other units who had come in to compete. He moved through the names the way you scan a menu at a restaurant you've been to 100 times, not really looking, just confirming nothing has changed. And then he stopped. Lieutenant Sophia Bennett. He read it twice. Then he turned around, coffee still in his hand, and he laughed. It wasn't a quiet laugh. It wasn't a private, under-the-breath reaction he kept to himself. It was loud. It was public. It was the kind of laugh that immediately pulled other people into it, because when a man with Ryan Mitchell's status finds something funny, the social pressure to agree is immediate and powerful. "Sophia Bennett," he said out loud, turning to face the soldiers who were already gathering. "They're sending us a woman." There were at least 30 people within earshot when he said it. Some laughed. Some smiled nervously. Some looked down at the ground. A few of the older operators exchanged a glance that meant something. But nobody said anything loud enough to push back. "I respect the paperwork," Ryan continued, because he was comfortable, and he was performing, and he knew it. "I respect the process. But this," he gestured toward the board, "this is a competitive evaluation, not a documentary shoot. We're not here to film inspiration content. We're here to find out who the best operators in this facility actually are." He shook his head with the kind of weary, knowing expression that was designed to communicate that he had nothing personal against anyone. He was just being honest. The diplomatic version of cruelty. The kind that always leaves the speaker looking reasonable, while the damage lands fully on the target. What he did not know, what nobody standing in that cluster of soldiers realized, was that Sophia Bennett was already there. She had arrived early. She always arrived early. She was standing approximately 10 feet to his left, partially behind two taller operators, holding a water bottle and her own copy of the printed competitor list. She had been looking at the board when Ryan walked up. She had stepped slightly to the side when the crowd gathered, not because she was hiding, but because she was watching. She had a habit of watching before she spoke. She had learned that you understood people better when they didn't know you were observing them. She heard everything, every word, every laugh, the specific tone of his voice when he said, "a woman," the way the crowd had responded, the silence of the people who disagreed but said nothing. She logged all of it, and she said nothing. When Ryan finally turned in the direction that put her in his line of sight, he saw her. The laughter fell off his face in a way that was almost physical, like a mask that had slipped. For exactly 2 seconds, he looked genuinely surprised. Then something else moved across his expression, something between dismissal and something harder to name. Sophia looked back at him, not with anger, not with tears, not with the defensive expression of someone who had just been hurt and needed the hurt acknowledged. She looked at him the way you look at a problem you have already decided how to solve, with focus and with patience, and with absolutely no urgency at all. That look bothered Ryan more than any argument could have. He had expected reaction. He had in some part of himself that he would never have admitted out loud wanted it, because reaction confirms that you have power over someone. If they fire back, you know you got to them. If they cry, even better. If they storm off, you've essentially won the first round before the competition even starts. Sophia gave him none of that. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, then she stepped forward. The cluster of soldiers around Ryan instinctively created a small gap. Not because they moved dramatically, just the quiet, almost unconscious social physics of a room making space for something that was about to happen. Sophia stopped 2 feet in front of him. "Commander Mitchell," she said. Her voice was level, not soft, not loud. The specific register of someone who did not need volume to carry authority. "I heard you." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. "I wasn't speaking to you." "No," she said. "You weren't. But I was close enough that the distinction doesn't really matter." She paused for exactly 1 breath. "You believe I don't belong here." He didn't answer immediately. "That's all right," she said. "I'm not here for your belief. I'm here for the challenge. When it's over, you can tell me again what you think." She held his gaze for 1 final moment. Then she walked away. She didn't storm off. She didn't walk fast. She didn't look back. She simply turned and moved with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who had already moved on to the next thing on her list, because as far as she was concerned, that part of the morning was finished. Ryan Mitchell watched her go. Around him, no one spoke. The soldiers who had been laughing a minute ago were very quiet, and Ryan, for the first time in longer than he could immediately remember, had absolutely no response prepared. That was the first mini-climax of Iron Harbor, and it was only 7:15 in the morning. What most of the people at that facility did not know about Sophia Bennett, what they couldn't have known from a name on a printed list, was how she had arrived at the moment of standing in front of Ryan Mitchell with that much stillness in her body. She was 27 years old. She had qualified as a Naval Special Warfare officer 18 months earlier, part of a class of operators that had been one of the first to formally integrate female candidates into the SEAL qualification pipeline after years of policy evolution. Her class of 42 had begun with 6 women. 3 had withdrawn voluntarily by week 2. 1 had been medically separated. 1 had failed the diving phase. Sophia had passed. She had not passed easily. That was the part that mattered, and the part that never made it into the short version of her story. The short version was first woman from her cohort to complete SEAL qualification. That was the headline. That was what got written down in official language and referenced in briefings by people who had never actually spoken to her. The full version was different. The full version included the night during Hell Week when she had been in the water for so long that her core temperature dropped to the point where the medical staff pulled her out and informed her that she was being evaluated for hypothermia. She had sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, shaking hard enough that her teeth rattled against each other, while a corpsman asked her questions to assess her cognitive function. She answered every question correctly. When he told her she was going to be held out of the next evolution for monitoring, she looked at him and said with complete seriousness and zero drama, "How long?" "At least 2 hours," he said. "And if my temp stabilizes in 90 minutes. He stared at her. "Then we reassess," he finally said. Her temperature stabilized in 83 minutes. She went back in the water. She didn't tell people that story, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't think it was remarkable. In her mind, it was simply what you did when you wanted something badly enough you stayed until you were allowed to continue. Her father had taught her that particular form of stubbornness. Master Chief Petty Officer David Bennett retired. Former Special Operations Combat Medic. 2 combat deployments in conditions that had broken men who had been built seemingly without breakable parts. He had never pushed Sophia toward the military, had never told her she should follow his path, had never sat her down and delivered a speech about service and sacrifice and legacy. What he had done consistently from the time she was small was refuse to rescue her from difficulty. When she was 9 years old and convinced she couldn't climb the rope in the gymnasium during PE class, she came home and told him about it with the expectation that he would commiserate, maybe offer some encouraging words, maybe tell her that rope climbing didn't matter anyway. Instead, he had looked at her calmly and said, "What specifically stopped you?" She didn't have a precise answer. "Figure that out first," he said. "Then you'll know what to fix." 3 weeks later, she climbed the rope. He never mentioned it again. He didn't need to. The lesson had already transferred. By the time Sophia was in high school, she was competing in national-level athletic events in open water swimming. By the time she was in college, she had made the decision to pursue military service with the specific intent of qualifying for the most demanding pipeline available to her gender at the time, which then still had formal restrictions. She spent 2 years working within those restrictions while advocating through legitimate channels. She filed paperwork. She met with commanders. She wrote a 12-page assessment of physical standards and presented it formally to a review board. She was told no 3 times. She came back a 4th time. The restriction changed. Not because of her alone, there were other people, other advocates, a shift in political and military leadership that had been building for years. But she had been part of the push, and she had been in position to act the moment the path opened, because she had never stopped preparing. She graduated qualification and received her assignment to a West Coast SEAL team. The reception there had not been hostile exactly. More accurately, it had been the specific social temperature of a place where people were professionally obligated to accept you, but personally uncertain what to make of you. People were polite. People were correct. But correctness, she had learned, was not the same as being welcome. There was a difference between people not blocking your path and people actually moving aside. She had been patient. She had performed. She had waited for the work to speak, because her father had told her there was no faster or more permanent way to change what people believed than giving them direct evidence that contradicted the belief. The Iron Harbor Readiness Challenge was the largest direct evidence opportunity she had encountered since joining the team. Which was why she had put her name on the list. Which was why, when Ryan Mitchell laughed, she had watched his face carefully and quietly filed away everything she observed. He was confident. He was dominant. He used social pressure instinctively and effectively. He expected hierarchical deference and read its absence as a personal challenge. He was accustomed to being the loudest authority in the room and genuinely did not know how to process someone who didn't react to that volume. She knew the type. She had trained against that type. And she knew exactly what it felt like to compete against someone who believed before the starting signal that they had already won, because that belief, that premature certainty, was its own form of vulnerability. The morning's first event was an orienteering exercise. 40 competitors were divided into groups of 4 and released into a mapped terrain course with designated checkpoints. The evaluation was not purely about physical speed. It was about decision-making, which routes you chose, how you communicated with your team, how you managed time when unexpected variables appeared. The previous year's winner of this event had been a 17-year veteran from an East Coast team who had completed the course in a way that the evaluators later described as tactically elegant. He had avoided 3 areas that most competitors defaulted toward: recognized that the shortcut through the southern ridge was actually longer given the terrain variation and made every checkpoint with time to spare. Sophia had read every documented account of the last 8 iterations of this challenge that she could legally access. She had spent 6 weeks developing a detailed analysis of the patterns in the evaluators' feedback, what they noted as positive, what they flagged as error, how the top performers over time had made their decisions differently from the median. She was not going to rely on instinct alone. She was going to use instinct informed by data. Her team for the first event was composed of a petty officer named Garrett, who seemed reserved and watchful, a chief named Douglas, who was gregarious and immediately took charge of initial conversation, and a younger operator named Park, who was clearly experienced but deferential, in a way that told Sophia he was in the habit of waiting to see which direction the strongest personality would pull before he committed to anything. Within 4 minutes of beginning the exercise, Douglas had proposed a route. It was the obvious route, the one most people would choose, direct, clear, and slightly too straightforward for an evaluation that consistently rewarded lateral thinking. Sophia listened to him lay it out. Then she said, "What's your read on the southern section between checkpoint 3 and 4? Douglas looked at her. "It's faster." "On paper," she said. "Check the elevation gradient on the original survey." Douglas looked at the map. Garrett spoke up for the first time. "She's right. That section gains 40 meters in less than a quarter mile. On packed terrain, it would add maybe 2 minutes. On the current ground condition..." He looked up. "Closer to 6. 6 minutes on one section puts us behind the pace line for the entire second half." Sophia said, not with triumph, but simply as a statement of arithmetic. "There's a northern route that adds distance, but keeps the elevation gradient manageable. We pick up the time back at checkpoint 5 where the terrain opens." Douglas stared at the map. He was a man who did not love being redirected. She could see it in the way his jaw worked before he spoke. "You've done this course before." "No," she said. "But I studied the historical data." There was a pause. "I say we listen," Garrett said quietly. Park nodded. Douglas looked at the map for another 3 seconds. Then he rolled it. "Northern route," he said, as though he had decided it himself. Sophia didn't correct the attribution. They finished the orienteering phase in the top 4 teams. While they were returning to the staging area, Garrett walked beside Sophia and said without much preamble, "You knew before we even started." "I had a strong hypothesis," she said. "That's the same thing." She looked at him. "Only if the hypothesis was right." He was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you just say you'd studied the historical data at the start? Would have saved 5 minutes of Douglas proposing the wrong route." She thought about it honestly. "Because Douglas needed to feel like he participated in the decision. If I'd led with 'I've already analyzed this,' he would have spent the rest of the event trying to find a place where he knew more than me. This way he redirected naturally, and he still feels like he contributed. He'll be easier to work with for the rest of the day." Garrett stared at her. "That's not tactical thinking," he said finally. "Sure it is," she said. "Tactics isn't just about terrain." By noon, word was moving through the facility. The way word always moves in tight, high-performance environments, not through announcements or official channels, but through conversations between people who had seen something they needed to process out loud. Sophia had not made dramatic moves. She had not drawn attention to herself. She had not performed for anyone watching. But she had made consistently excellent decisions across 3 events, and in environments where 3 excellent decisions in a row was statistically unusual enough to get noticed, people were noticing. Ryan Mitchell heard the talk. He was coming out of his second event, which he had won comfortably, with the ease of a man who was lapping a field he had already beaten before. He was in good spirits. He had pushed hard in the water crossing phase and finished nearly 90 seconds ahead of the second-place operator, which was the kind of margin that made other competitors exhale slowly when they looked at the result board. One of his former students, an operator named Tran, fell into step beside him. "The Bennett woman sitting inside the top 10 across all 3 morning events," Tran said. Ryan didn't react visibly. "She took her team northern route on the orienteering," Tran continued. "Everyone else went southern. Her team finished 3rd. Best result of any team that took a non-primary route." Ryan was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. "One morning," he said. "Yes, sir. Come back to me after the tactical decision series." He kept walking, but something had shifted slightly in the atmosphere around him, the way a pressure system changes before anyone sees visible weather. He had categorized Sophia as a public relations insertion, a politically motivated addition to a serious competition whose presence was more about optics than merit. That categorization had felt solid this morning. It felt less solid now. And Ryan Mitchell, whatever else he was not someone who ignored data that conflicted with his assumptions. He simply needed more data before he would update the assumption. The afternoon brought the tactical decision series. This was the event that most closely approximated real operational conditions. Teams were given compressed timelines, incomplete information, and high-consequence scenarios. Evaluators watched not just the decisions, but the process, how the team communicated, who led, how they managed disagreement, how they recovered when initial assumptions proved wrong. Sophia led her team. She had not declared herself the leader. She had simply asked the first organizing question at the beginning of the first scenario, and from that point, the team's eyes had defaulted to her in the way eyes default to whoever is producing the clearest signal in a noisy environment. In the third scenario, the evaluators introduced a variable that wasn't in the initial briefing. A change in the position of a secondary target that invalidated the team's initial approach entirely. Most teams in that position experienced a brief but measurable period of confusion and recalibration. That period cost them on timing. Sophia's team didn't hesitate, because Sophia had already planned for the scenario changing. She had articulated to her team before they began 2 contingency branches what they would do if the primary approach was viable, and what they would do if it wasn't. When the variable shifted, her team didn't need to stop and rebuild a plan. They activated the contingency they had already discussed. She pre-briefed the alternative. One of the evaluators said to the senior evaluator, standing beside him, not bothering to lower his voice much, because he was impressed enough that he'd briefly forgotten his professional composure. The senior evaluator watched Sophia direct her team through the adjusted scenario with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 20 years. "She didn't plan for success," the senior evaluator said. "She planned for disruption. What's the difference? Most people plan their route to the objective. She planned her response to everything that can change the route." He paused. "That's the difference between someone who trains to win under ideal conditions and someone who trains to function when conditions stop being ideal." He made a note. By the end of the day's first full round, Sophia Bennett was in 4th place overall. The 3 people above her were Ryan Mitchell, in first, a Master Chief named Holloway, who had been competing in this challenge for 6 years, and a relatively unknown lieutenant commander from a Pacific team named Solace, who had apparently been exceptional throughout, without attracting much attention. Ryan's lead was comfortable, but no longer comfortable the way it had been at the beginning of the day. Because Sophia was not finished, and everybody at Iron Harbor was beginning to understand that. In the debrief room that evening, 30 competitors gathered to review the day's evaluator feedback. The format was direct results were posted. Standout moments were identified. Errors were discussed without softening. Sophia sat toward the back. Ryan sat at the front, where he always sat, which was the position that allowed him to see the room and allowed the room to see him. Habit. Instinct. The specific spatial preference of a man who was used to having the most authority present. The lead evaluator, a captain named Weston, who had spent 22 years moving through the special operations community and had the permanent tiredness of someone who had seen too much to be impressed, easily walked through the day's results with his characteristic directness. When he got to the tactical decision series, he paused. 2 performances today I want to call out specifically, he said. The first is Commander Mitchell's water phase, which I'll be direct was exceptional on the physical metrics. 90 seconds over second place in those conditions is a real margin. He nodded toward Ryan. Well executed. Ryan gave a measured nod. The second, Weston said, is the tactical decision series, where the performance of Lieutenant Bennett's team was in my evaluation the strongest composite showing of the day. He let that land without commentary. Specifically, the contingency structuring in Scenario 3. When the secondary target displaced that team was the only one that didn't lose time on recalibration. The room was very quiet. Ryan's expression did not change. But the operator sitting next to him noticed that his right hand, which had been resting loosely on the table, tightened slightly. Sophia in the back of the room also noticed, because she had been watching him all day. "Tomorrow will be a significant day," Weston said, closing his notebook. "The field narrows. The margin for error becomes smaller. I expect everyone in this room to sleep, eat well, and be here at 0600 prepared to be uncomfortable." He looked around. Questions? There were none. People began moving. Ryan Mitchell stood, and on his way toward the door, he stopped at the back of the room. He stopped in front of Sophia. The people nearest to them slowed, without obviously slowing that specific social hesitation of someone who wants to observe something but doesn't want to be seen doing it. "Good day," Ryan said to her. "Not warm, not cold, careful." "Thank you," Sophia said. "Your orienteering call was correct," he said. It cost him something to say it. She could see that it did. The northern route read counterintuitive on the standard approach. "It reads that way if you're optimizing for distance," she said. "But the evaluation has never been purely about distance." He was quiet for a moment. "Where did you get the historical data?" "The library," she said simply. "The evaluator reports from years 2 through 8 are in the facility reference archive. Anyone can access them." He blinked. It was almost imperceptible, but she caught it. "Nobody reads those," he said. "I know," she said. Another beat. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant," he said. "You too, Commander." He walked out. Sophia watched him go. Garrett, who had materialized beside her at some point in the last 30 seconds, looked at her carefully. "What was that?" he said. "The beginning of a conversation," she said. "With the man who told 500 people this morning that you didn't belong here." She picked up her bag. "Yes," she said. "That specific man. Because he's not what he looks like yet." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. "You're either the most confident person I've ever met," he said. "Or," she asked, "or the one with the longest game I've ever seen." She smiled very slightly. "Go get some sleep, Garrett." She walked out into the evening, and behind her the debrief room slowly emptied, and the facility settled into its night routine, and somewhere on the other side of the building, Ryan Mitchell sat in his quarters and opened a laptop and navigated for the first time in his years at Iron Harbor to the facility reference archive. He found the evaluator reports. He opened the first one. He started reading. He had read until 2 in the morning. Ryan Mitchell was not a man who admitted to things easily, even privately, even alone in a room where the only audience was himself. But sitting in the quiet of his quarters with the evaluator reports open on his laptop, he had found something he didn't expect, a pattern he had never seen because he had never looked for it. The competitors who performed best across the full challenge, not just in isolated physical events, but across all categories combined, were not always the strongest. They were the most adaptable. They were the people who had studied the challenge itself, the way a surgeon studies anatomy before picking up a scalpel. They understood the terrain of the evaluation, not just the terrain of the course. He had won 3 times on physical dominance and tactical instinct alone. He had never once read an evaluator report. He closed the laptop at 2:17 and stared at the ceiling for a long time before he slept. Morning came with the specific indifference that military facilities apply to human fatigue. 0600 was 0600, regardless of what anyone had been doing at 2 in the morning, and the facility was alive and operational before the sun had fully committed to rising. Sophia had slept 6 hours. She had learned in SEAL training that 6 hours of quality sleep outperformed 8 hours of poor sleep every single time, and she had developed the discipline to stop her mind from running when she told it to stop. She ate a structured breakfast, the same breakfast she ate before any high-performance day, because her body knew what that sequence of food meant, and there was value in signals that required no translation. She arrived at the staging area 11 minutes before the required time. Ryan was already there. He was standing with 2 of his former students, Tran and a broad-shouldered operator named Kerrigan, and the conversation stopped when Sophia walked into the staging area. Not dramatically. Not with hostility. Just stopped. The way conversations stop when someone enters a room and changes the composition of the social atmosphere. She acknowledged them with a brief nod and moved to the edge of the assembled competitors where Garrett was already waiting, holding 2 cups of coffee with the expression of a man who had anticipated that she would need one. "You sleep?" he asked, handing her a cup. "6 hours. "I slept 4, he said. Kept thinking about scenario 3. The displacement call. The way you pre-briefed the contingency." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. "I've been in competition scenarios for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone do that before we even started the clock." Sophia took a sip. "Most people plan for the expected scenario. The expected scenario is never what actually happens." "Where did you learn that?" She thought about it. "My father used to say, plan for what you know, prepare for what you don't." She paused. He was talking about field medicine, but the principle is the same. You can't predict the injury. You can predict that there will be an injury. Garrett was quiet for a moment. What did he do? Special Operations Combat Medic, retired Master Chief. Garrett nodded slowly, the way people nod when a piece of information rearranges something they already thought they understood. "So you grew up in this world?" "I grew up watching what the world did to people who weren't prepared for it," she said. "That's different from growing up in it." Before Garrett could respond, Captain Weston's voice cut across the staging area with the efficient authority of a man who didn't believe in preamble. "Listen up. Day 2. The field today is 22 competitors. By end of day, that number will be 12. The reduction events are not forgiving, and they are not designed to be. You will be evaluated on performance under stress decision-making in resource-constrained environments and your ability to maintain effective function when the situation is actively working against you." He paused and let that hang in the air for exactly the right amount of time. Day 1 told us who showed up prepared. Day 2 will tell us who can sustain it. He looked across the assembled competitors. First event. Leadership Under Fire Series. You will rotate through 3 compressed command scenarios with 45-second intervals between. No warm-up, no review period. You will lead from the moment the scenario initiates. 22 competitors looked back at him. Some of them had done this before and knew what was coming. Some of them hadn't and were about to find out. The Leadership Under Fire series was exactly what it sounded like, and somehow still worse than what most people imagined when they heard the description. Each scenario was a compressed simulation of a decision point, the kind that existed in real operational environments, when everything that could go wrong had gone wrong simultaneously. And the person in the leadership position had maybe 8 seconds to produce a coherent direction for the people depending on them. The scenarios were evaluated on outcome, yes, but more heavily on process. The evaluators wanted to see how a leader's mind worked under genuine pressure, not just whether they arrived at the right answer by luck or instinct. Sophia had prepared for this specific event. She had prepared for it by spending the last 6 months deliberately practicing high-pressure decision-making in uncomfortable contexts, not in training simulations specifically, but in real situations where she had to make fast calls with incomplete information and then live with the result. She had requested the most ambiguous assignments on her team. She had volunteered for planning exercises where the parameters were deliberately unclear. She had built a habit in her own mind of getting comfortable with the specific discomfort of not knowing enough and having to act anyway. The first scenario came at her hard. A compromised extraction route. 3 personnel at risk. 2 options, both with significant downsides. A time constraint that made extended deliberation impossible. She went left when most trained instinct would go right. The evaluator watching her wrote something on his clipboard without any visible reaction. The second scenario was worse. A communications failure at the worst possible moment, combined with a personnel accountability problem. The kind of scenario that was designed to produce the freezing response, the moment when a person's cognitive system, overloaded with simultaneous negative inputs, simply stops processing forward and loops. Sophia didn't freeze. She triaged. She had a mental framework for exactly this. A hierarchy of priorities she had built and drilled until it was automatic. What is the life safety situation? What is the communication status? What is the accountability status in that specific order? Addressed in that specific order, regardless of which one felt most urgent. Feeling and framework were two different things. She used the framework. The evaluator wrote something longer this time. The third scenario was the one nobody expected. It wasn't a tactical problem. It was a personnel problem. The scenario placed her in command of a team where one member had made a serious error that had compromised the mission objective, and the evaluation required her to handle it in real time in front of the team with the mission still ongoing and a time-sensitive secondary objective still on the clock. This was where most people either overcorrected, came down too hard, destroyed the team's cohesion, prioritized accountability over function, or undercorrected, minimized the error to preserve relationships, and lost credibility in the process. Sophia did neither. She addressed the error directly in 2 sentences, without anger, without blame, language, and without extended discussion. She assigned a specific corrective action for the immediate situation. She moved the team forward. She circled back to the full accountability conversation at the scenario's natural pause point when the secondary objective was secured, and handled it then with the completeness it deserved. The evaluator stopped writing and just watched. After the 3 scenarios were complete and the competitors were released to the staging area for the 40-minute transition period before the next event, one of the assistant evaluators approached the senior evaluator, a commander named Hirsch, who had been watching Sophia's rotation specifically. "Thoughts," the assistant said. Hirsch took his time. Scenario 1, her route decision was unconventional. Could have been a risk that backfired. Under the specific parameters of this simulation, it was the better call, but I want to see the logic before I weight it fully. And 2, triage sequence was textbook, but more importantly, it was fast. She didn't deliberate on the sequence. It was already there. He tapped his pen against the clipboard. That's training. That's something she built before today. 3. Hirsch paused longer on 3. I've been running leadership under fire for 4 years, he said. I've seen people handle the personnel scenario about 50 ways. He looked across the staging area to where Sophia was sitting quietly with Garrett, not celebrating, not reviewing, just recovering. What she did in scenario 3, the separation of immediate correction from full accountability. That's a maturity of leadership that most people develop over a decade in command. She's 27. The assistant was quiet. I'm not saying she's the best person here, Hirsch said carefully. I'm saying she is surprising me in ways that I am obligated to take seriously. He closed his clipboard. Pull her scenario 3 footage for the full review session. Across the staging area, Ryan Mitchell was being told by Tran that Sophia had come through the leadership series strong. Ryan was eating a protein bar and not particularly looking at anything. She's consistent, Tran said. That's the thing. It's not one good event. She's consistent across categories. Ryan chewed. What's her standing? He asked. After this morning's event, she'll probably move into 3rd. Maybe 2nd, depending on how the scores stack. Ryan looked up at that. Holloway had a rough series, Tran added. He froze on scenario 2 for about 4 seconds. That's going to cost him. Ryan said nothing. But he looked across the staging area. Sophia was talking to Garrett. She had her notebook open. She carried an actual paper notebook, which Ryan had noticed and not commented on, and she was writing something. Not reviewing. Preparing. She was already looking at the next event. Ryan finished the protein bar, folded the wrapper, put it in his pocket. What's the next event? He asked. Physical evaluation series. Loaded carries water crossing obstacle completion. Ryan felt something settle in him. That's my event. Yes, sir, Tran said. And he meant it genuinely without guile, because in the physical domains, Ryan Mitchell was still in a category that was difficult to argue with. He had spent 19 years turning his body into a reliable instrument under the most demanding conditions the military could construct. He knew his physical capabilities the way a pilot knows their aircraft, not theoretically, but functionally, with the specific confidence of someone who has pushed past the limits more than once and learned exactly where those limits actually lived. The physical evaluation series was the portion of the challenge that many people had cited that morning in the same breath as Sophia's name, when they argued that her presence in the competition couldn't be taken fully seriously. Not because of malice necessarily, but because the raw physical parameters of certain military tasks existed in a domain where biological differences were real and documented and not dismissible through sheer determination. Sophia knew this argument. She had been hearing it her entire career in one form or another. She didn't dismiss it. She had never dismissed it. The argument was not entirely wrong on the physics. Where it failed, where it had always failed, was in its application. The argument treated physical capacity as the totality of military performance, which was a flattening of something that was inherently multidimensional. It also underestimated what a decade of highly specific physical training, executed with unusual intelligence about one's own body and its particular capacities, could produce. She wasn't going to beat Ryan Mitchell on absolute load. She knew that before she walked onto the course. What she was going to do was execute her own performance at a level that the evaluation's composite scoring system would reward appropriately, relative to her weight class and established standards, and in some of the technical elements where physical mass was less relevant than technique and efficiency, she intended to perform at a level that would be difficult for anyone to dismiss. The loaded carry was first. Ryan went through it at a pace that drew audible reactions from the watching soldiers. Not the 500 from day one, because the competition was now internal to the competing field, but a substantial audience of staff and evaluators and off-duty operators who had found reasons to be visible in the general area of the events. He moved with the specific mechanical efficiency of a man who had been doing this for so long that his body had optimized at a cellular level. His time was the kind of number that got repeated in conversation afterward. Sophia went through it and hit her target standards cleanly within the parameters that the evaluation's framework established as exceptional for her weight category. She didn't try to perform Ryan's event. She performed her own event at the level her own event demanded, and she executed it without any visible struggle, which, given what the load represented relative to her body weight, was its own form of impressive to the people watching who understood the math. The water crossing was where something happened that nobody planned. The crossing required competitors to navigate a water obstacle in full kit, including weighted vest moving against a current that the facility controlled through an intake system. The evaluators adjusted the current intensity based on each competitor's profile. The standard was the same relative difficulty regardless of who was in the water. Ryan went in and crossed with the specific animal efficiency that defined his physical reputation. He came out the other side and didn't look back. Sophia went in. At the midpoint of the crossing, the current spiked. It wasn't scheduled. The intake control system had a mechanical variance issue that the technicians hadn't caught in the morning check. The current increased approximately 20% above the programmed level for a period of about 40 seconds, before the technician monitoring the system caught it and corrected. 40 seconds in a current, 20% above standard in full kit. Fighting for position against water that was suddenly and unexpectedly working harder against you, that was a genuine test. The soldiers watching saw Sophia's body angle change the moment the current spiked. They saw her dig, not a just dig. There was a difference, and the people who understood what they were looking at recognized it immediately. Adjusting was what you did when a situation became moderately more difficult. What Sophia did was what you did when something tried to take you and you refused to be taken. She crossed. She came out the other side. She checked her kit. She confirmed her status with the evaluator. She stepped aside. A staff sergeant named Owens, who had been watching from the bank, turned to the person beside him and said quietly, "Did the current just spike?" "About 20%, the person beside him said. "For about 40 seconds. Owens watched Sophia finish her equipment check with the composed efficiency of someone who had just crossed a maintenance obstacle, not a nearly failed crossing. "She didn't signal," Owens said. "No." "She didn't ask for a restart." "No." Owens was quiet for a moment. "She didn't even look at the evaluators when it spiked." "I know," the person beside him said. "She just drove through it." "Yeah," the person beside him said. "She did." That observation moved through the watching group quickly, in the specific way that information moves among people who are trained to notice operational behavior, because what Sophia had done was not remarkable in the way that dramatic gestures are remarkable. It was remarkable in the way that deep competence is remarkable, the quiet, almost invisible quality of someone who encounters a problem and handles it without the problem becoming larger than the solution. Ryan Mitchell heard about the current spike 20 minutes later. He was told by Kerrigan, matter-of-factly, while they were moving to the obstacle completion course. "How much?" Ryan asked. "About 20%. For 35-40 seconds." Ryan was quiet. "She went through it?" he asked. "Didn't break pace, didn't signal." More quiet. "Who had that crossing on record before today?" Ryan asked. "Holloway 2 years ago. He requested a restart when the current was irregular." Ryan said nothing for a moment. Then, "Holloway was right to request it." "Yes, sir." "The protocol exists for a reason." "Yes, sir." A beat. "She didn't use it," Ryan said. "No, sir, she didn't." They walked toward the obstacle course in silence, and Ryan Mitchell did what he almost never did. He thought about someone else's performance more than he thought about his own. The obstacle completion course was the final event of the afternoon series, and it was the event that the facility's culture had always pointed to as the defining test of the challenge, partly for legitimate reasons, and partly because military culture had a deep and long-standing relationship with physical obstacle completion as a symbolic test of worth. It was where the story of any given competition tended to crystallize into something people would actually repeat afterward. There were 12 distinct elements. The scoring weighted efficiency and completion above raw speed, which meant that mistakes, losing grip requiring additional attempts, poor technique on the technical elements cost more than moderate slowness on the straight movement sections. Ryan went through it the way he went through everything physical, with force and precision, and the specific momentum of a man who trusted his own body completely. He took the technical elements aggressively, which occasionally cost him slightly on precision, but not enough to damage his score significantly. He finished with the kind of number that his students would talk about for the next 6 months. Then Sophia went. She was 3 competitors after Ryan, which meant the watching audience had Ryan's run fresh in their minds as a reference point. Some of them, the ones who had been loudest this morning, or who had laughed when his name was read, had unconsciously arrived at the obstacle course carrying a comparison that they had already decided. They had decided she wouldn't match it. The question in their minds wasn't if it was by how much. Sophia's approach to the first element was different from Ryan's immediately. Where he had gone at it with force, she went at it with geometry. She found the angle that let her leverage applied precisely at the points of structural support, and the element that had cost Ryan 2.5 seconds resolved itself in under 2 seconds. She moved to the second element before the watching soldiers had fully processed what they'd seen. She moved through this course with a quality that was hard to name precisely in the moment, but became clear in retrospect. She was never fighting the obstacles. She was solving them. Every element was a problem with a specific optimal solution, and she found the solution instead of overpowering the problem. Where physical mass and raw strength would produce one result, geometry and technique and the specific intelligent reading of load distribution and momentum produced another result, different but comparable in the final accounting. By element 8, the watching soldiers had gone quiet. Not the awkward quiet of discomfort, though some of that was present. A different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when people are watching something that's making them reconsider a belief they didn't realize they were holding. Ryan Mitchell, standing near the finish, was watching. His expression was still. Professionally still. The kind of stillness that costs something to maintain. Sophia hit the final element, a wall traverse with a weighted component, and completed it with a technique that the evaluators would later describe in their formal report as unusually efficient given the load parameters. She stepped off the course. She checked her kit. She was breathing hard. She was human, and it had been a genuinely demanding course. But she was controlled, and she looked at nothing in particular while she recovered, which was what she always did. She didn't look at the scoreboard. She didn't look at Ryan. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at her notebook. She opened it. She wrote 2 sentences. She closed it. Garrett appeared beside her. "What do you write?" he asked, and there was genuine curiosity in it, not invasion. "What I would change," she said. "You just completed that course at a level that—" He stopped himself. "And you're already writing what you would change. The point isn't to celebrate what worked," she said. The point is to not repeat what didn't. He stared at her. What didn't work? He asked, genuinely baffled. Element 4, she said. I read the grip surface wrong on the initial approach and corrected mid-movement. Cost me less than a second, but that second exists, and I want to understand why I misread it. Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You know, he said, most people who had your morning would be celebrating right now. I'll celebrate when it's over, she said. Right now there's still day 3. Garrett looked across the course to where Ryan Mitchell was standing. Ryan had not moved. He was still watching Sophia. And the look on his face was not the look from this morning, the loud, dismissive certainty of a man who had already decided. It was something quieter than that. Something more like the expression of a man in the middle of updating a calculation that he had assumed was already settled. He's watching you, Garrett said. I know, Sophia said. What do you think he's thinking? She didn't hesitate. He's thinking about what he underestimated, she said, and how he underestimated it, and whether that's going to matter tomorrow. Garrett turned to look at her. Is it going to matter? He asked. She closed her notebook. What do you think? The standing results after day 2 were posted at 17:30. Ryan Mitchell, 1st place. Sophia Bennett, 2nd place. Holloway had dropped to 4th after the Leadership Series performance, and Salas had held 3rd. But the story that moved through the facility that evening was not about Holloway or Salas. It was about the 9 positions Sophia had climbed in 2 days from where she'd started to where she now sat with 1 day remaining. Ryan saw the board. He stood in front of it for a longer time than he usually did. Tran stood behind him. She's been in 2nd before, Tran offered carefully. Last year, Chen was 2nd going into day 3 and finished 4th. Chen didn't have her morning on the water crossing, Ryan said. Tran was quiet. Chen didn't have her Leadership Series. Ryan turned away from the board. Chen was a good competitor who had a good 2 days and ran out of runway on day 3. He paused. She is something different. Tran had never heard Ryan Mitchell describe a competitor as something different. He had heard him describe competitors as strong, as well-trained, as surprising on individual events. He had never heard that specific phrase. What are you going to do? Tran asked. Ryan was already walking toward the quarters. What I should have done last week, he said over his shoulder. Prepare. There was something else that happened that evening in a corridor between the operational wing and the administrative section that was small in scale, but large in consequence. A younger operator, 23 years old, 3 months out of his own qualification, training a kid named Voss, who had been watching the competition with the specific intensity of someone who had recently been told by their own chain of command that they needed to observe how the best people operated, found himself in the same corridor as Sophia at approximately 1900 hours. He almost didn't say anything. He almost walked past. But he stopped. Lieutenant Bennett, he said. She turned. He looked uncomfortable, which was honest he was. I was in the group this morning, he said. When Commander Mitchell... He stopped. Tried again. I laughed. She looked at him steadily. I want you to know I'm not... He stopped again. I didn't think before I did it. Everyone was laughing and I... You went with the room, she said. He blinked. Yes, exactly. I know, she said. It wasn't personal. I understand how rooms work. He exhaled slowly. I watched you today, he said. All day. I watched every event I could see. And I've been thinking about what I want my career to look like. He said it with the specific earnestness of someone very young who had not yet been conditioned out of saying true things directly. In 10 years, in 15. And I realize today that the way you think, the way you prepare, the way you move through a problem. He searched for the word. That's what I want to build. She was quiet for a moment. Don't build what I built, she said. He looked confused. Build what's yours, she said. Study the history, understand the patterns, develop a framework for disruption, but build it from what you actually are, not from what you saw me do. She paused. My approach works for me because it came from understanding who I am under pressure. Yours has to come from understanding who you are under pressure. That's not the same thing. He was quiet for a long moment. How do I figure that out? He asked. Stop going with the room, she said simply. When the room does something and you feel the pull to join it before you've actually decided that's the moment, stop. Make the decision yourself. She looked at him with the directness that was one of her defining qualities. You'll know who you are pretty quickly once you start doing that. Voss stood in the corridor after she walked away. He stood there for a full 30 seconds. Then he took out his own notebook he had started carrying. 2 months ago, had never told anyone, had felt slightly self-conscious about it, and he wrote down what she'd said. Not word for word. He wrote down the part that had landed. Stop going with the room. In his quarters that night, Ryan Mitchell had the historical evaluator reports open again, but this time he was cross-referencing them with something specific. The profiles of the competitors in previous years who had been in second place going into day 3. What they had done. How they had approached the final day. What the patterns told him about the specific pressures and opportunities that the final day's structure created. He worked until midnight. He was not afraid of Sophia Bennett. He was something more useful than afraid. He was paying attention. And for the first time in 19 years at this facility, Ryan Mitchell was preparing for day 3 of a challenge he had assumed from the morning of day 1 that he had already won. Day 3 arrived the way reckonings always do not. With announcement, but with the specific weight of something that has been building for long enough that the air itself feels different. Sophia was awake at 5. Not because her alarm pulled her out of sleep, but because her body had decided the night was finished and there was no argument to be made against it. She lay still for exactly 4 minutes. She knew it was 4 minutes, because she counted a habit from Hell Week, when time management inside your own mind was the only resource nobody could take from you. And then she got up. She did not review her notes. She had reviewed them the night before, closed the notebook, and made a conscious decision to leave the preparation where it was. Over-preparation on the morning of execution was its own form of anxiety, wearing the costume of diligence. She knew what she knew. She had built what she had built. The work was finished. What remained was the performance. She ate the same breakfast. She moved through the same sequence. She arrived at the staging area with 11 minutes to spare, which was exactly the same margin she had used on days 1 and 2, because consistency in the small rituals was how you told your nervous system that this day was not categorically different from any other day, even when it obviously was. Ryan was already there. This time he was alone. He was standing with a cup of coffee and a stillness that Sophia recognized immediately as different from the relaxed dominance he had displayed on day 1. That stillness had been the stillness of a man who had no concern about the outcome. This stillness was something else entirely. It was the stillness of concentrated focus, the kind you only develop when you take something seriously enough to give it your complete attention. He looked at her when she walked in. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. But something passed between them in that brief exchange that was more honest than anything that had been said out loud since the moment at the competitor board on day 1 morning. It was a mutual acknowledgement, wordless, direct, and clean. Whatever this day was going to produce, both of them were here for the real version of it. Garrett appeared beside Sophia with coffee. You see his face? Garrett said, keeping his voice low. Yes, she said. That's not the same man from yesterday morning? No, she said. It isn't. Is that good for you or bad for you? She took the coffee. It's better, she said. I don't want to beat someone who isn't fully present. I want to beat him at his best. Garrett stared at her for a moment. Most people don't think that way. Most people compete to win, she said. I'm competing to prove something. Those require different conditions. Captain Weston called the field together at 0610 seconds, which was the first time in 3 days he had started at anything other than the precise hour. Nobody mentioned it, but everyone noticed because in an environment where precision was a value system, a 10-second deviation was its own form of signal. 12 competitors, Weston said. 1 day. The structure today is different from days 1 and 2. You will not have event rotations with transition periods. Today runs as a continuous integrated assessment. 1 scenario, multiple phases, no breaks between phases, except what the scenario itself creates. He paused. The scenario is classified at this level until the start signal. What I will tell you now is that it will test everything, not categories, everything simultaneously. He looked across the 12 faces. You have done things in this challenge that I have noted and that the evaluation record will reflect. Today is not about confirming what you already showed us. Today is about finding out what happens when you are asked to produce all of it at once, under conditions that are designed to make producing all of it at once feel impossible. He checked his watch. Start signal in 20 minutes. Use them. The 12 competitors separated into their own private spaces of preparation. Ryan moved to the far side of the staging area and stood facing a wall, which was something Sophia had not seen him do before. She had seen him project outward toward audiences, toward rooms, toward the people around him. Facing a wall was an inward movement. He was going somewhere inside himself. She recognized it because she did the same thing before events that mattered at the deepest level. Voss, the young operator from the corridor conversation the night before, was among the 12 remaining competitors. He found Sophia briefly before the start signal. I've been thinking about what you said, he told her. About the room. Don't think about it right now, she said, not unkindly. Right now, just compete. Think about it afterward. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. He paused. Good luck. You too, she said. He walked away, and Sophia closed her eyes for 30 seconds, which was her specific pre-event ritual. 30 seconds of silence, in which she did nothing except exist in her own body, and confirm that everything was where it was supposed to be. Her breathing, her heart rate, the specific quality of alertness that she needed to function at her best. She checked all of it the way a pilot checks instrumentation, not anxiously but methodically, because the check itself was part of the readiness. The start signal came, and the scenario that Weston had described as testing everything revealed itself in its full structure. It was a multi-phase operational simulation, the kind that the challenge had used only once before in its 7th year. And that had become something of a legend in the facility's institutional memory because of the specific demands it placed on competitors. It required each competitor to move through a sequence of interconnected phases with their performance in each phase directly affecting the conditions of the next phase. There was no reset. There was no do-over. Every decision compounded forward. The first phase was navigational and tactical, combined a map problem with a time element and a personnel accountability component. Sophia moved through it with the deliberate efficiency that had characterized her entire challenge performance, making 2 unconventional route choices that cost her slightly on raw time, but preserved options she would need in the later phases. She knew this because she had studied the one previous iteration of this scenario type closely enough to understand that the early phases were traps for people who optimized locally, who made the best decision for the immediate phase without considering what that decision foreclosed later. Ryan, she learned afterward from the evaluator summary, had taken the direct route through the first phase. Faster by 4 minutes. But the direct route consumed a resource allocation that the second phase would require. She found this out at the transition between phases 1 and 2, when the evaluator handed each competitor a resource card that reflected what their phase 1 choices had preserved or expended. Sophia's card showed 3 available allocations. Ryan's card, she could see from 2 positions away in the queue, showed 2. 1 allocation difference. In the context of a multi-phase scenario, with compounding consequences, 1 allocation difference was not a small thing. Ryan looked at his card. She watched his face without appearing to watch his face. He understood immediately. She could see the moment of comprehension move across his expression, not visible to most people, but she had been studying him for 2.5 days. And she knew his face now with the specific intimacy of close tactical observation. He understood what the card meant. He understood why it was different from what he expected, and he understood what it implied about the difference in their phase 1 approaches. He did not look at her, but the line of his jaw changed. Phase 2 was the one that broke Holloway. It was a personnel crisis scenario layered over a time-critical objective. The specific combination that was designed to force competitors to make a choice between mission accomplishment and personnel welfare, because in real operational environments, that choice existed, and there was no clean answer. And the evaluation was specifically watching how you navigated the impossibility of it, rather than whether you found the perfect solution, because there was no perfect solution, and the evaluators knew it, and that was the entire point. Holloway chose mission. He made it cleanly and decisively, and he was not wrong to make it. But the way he made it, the specific quality of the decision, the absence of any visible acknowledgement of what was being sacrificed, produced a reaction from the evaluators that his score would later reflect. Not because the decision was incorrect, but because a decision like that made without the weight it deserved said something about how the person making it understood the full cost of command. He finished Phase 2 and moved to Phase 3, and never recovered the ground he needed. Sophia hit Phase 2 and stopped for 4 seconds. Not because she didn't know what to do, because she was making the decision completely with the full weight it required before she executed. The 4-second pause was not hesitation. It was integrity, the specific integrity of a person who refused to make a hard call without first acknowledging internally and completely what the hard call actually cost. She chose the mission objective, same as Holloway. But the 4 seconds were visible to the evaluators, and the evaluators were trained to read the difference between frozen and deliberate, and they read it correctly. She moved into Phase 2 execution with the resources her card allowed, and handled it with a precision that came from having 3 allocations, where others had 2, the forward planning dividend paying itself out in the exact moment it was designed to. Ryan hit Phase 2 with 2 allocations, and managed it with the specific skill of a man who was deeply good at making less work as much as more. He was not a person who wasted anything. He had spent 19 years learning how to extract maximum output from constrained resources, which was fundamentally what all elite operational training was learning to function at a high level when the comfortable margins had been stripped away. He moved through Phase 2 efficiently, cleanly, and without the 4-second pause Sophia had taken. He was faster through it than she was. By the end of Phase 2, Ryan was ahead on time, but the resource differential was still there. And Phase 3 was where it would matter. The audience of off-duty operators and staff had grown through the morning. The word had moved through the facility, not officially, not through any announcement, but through the specific social network of a tight professional community where interesting things travel at their own speed, and the people who had watched Day 1 and Day 2 had found ways to be in the general vicinity of the assessment area without technically violating the protocols that kept the competing field insulated from external noise. There were perhaps 200 people in the outer viewing areas when Phase 3 initiated. Phase 3 was the one that the 7-year veterans of this challenge, who had watched the multi-phase scenario the one previous time it had been run, had been waiting for. It was a direct leadership confrontation. Not physical, not tactical, something harder than either of those. 2 competitors were placed in the same scenario simultaneously, with overlapping objectives that could not both be fully achieved. They had to negotiate the conflict in real time, in front of the evaluators, reaching a resolution that both served the mission outcome and demonstrated the quality of their command judgment. The evaluators had the authority to pair any 2 competitors for this phase. They paired Ryan Mitchell and Sophia Bennett. The announcement came from Hirsch, who delivered it with the flat professionalism of someone who understood what he was doing and was not going to dress it up. Ryan heard it and turned to look at Sophia. Sophia heard it and turned to look at Ryan. There was a beat between them that was perhaps 2 seconds long and contained more than 2 seconds worth of understanding. "Well," Ryan said, and there was something new in his voice, not warmth exactly, but a quality close to it. Respect in its earliest, least comfortable form. "Here we are." "Here we are," she said. They were given 5 minutes to review the scenario parameters independently before the joint session began. Sophia read through the parameters with the focused speed of someone who had been reading compressed operational documents under time pressure for years. The scenario was layered. There were 3 objectives, 2 of which could be achieved simultaneously with good coordination, and 1 of which was in direct tension with the other 2. The resolution required 1 competitor to formally yield on the contested objective and redirect their allocated resources to support the other competitor's achievement of it, which meant in the evaluation's terms that 1 person was going to come out of this phase with a stronger immediate result, and the other was going to come out of it with a result that looked like a concession. But the evaluation was not scoring the result. It was scoring the process. Specifically, how did each competitor reason about the conflict? How did they communicate under pressure, And what did their resolution process reveal about their understanding of mission over ego? This was the twist that most people reading the scenario parameters missed until it was too late. The trap was assuming this phase was a competition. It wasn't. It was a collaboration assessment wearing the costume of a competition. The evaluators were watching whether either competitor would figure that out in time, and if they did, how they would navigate the social complexity of proposing collaboration in a setting that felt competitive. Sophia figured it out in 3 minutes. She closed the scenario document and looked up at the wall across from her, and sat with the realization for the remaining 2 minutes of the review period, not because she needed more time to understand it, but because she wanted to choose her words carefully. How she opened the joint session would determine whether Ryan trusted the frame she was going to offer or whether he heard it as a manipulation. The joint session began. They sat across from each other at a table. The evaluators sat to the side, visible but not intrusive. Outside the room, the awareness of the watching community existed like a pressure they both chose to ignore. Ryan spoke first. "You've read the objective tension." "Yes," she said. "Objectives 1 and 2 are achievable together with good resource coordination. Objective 3, conflicts with both of them if we each pursue our individual allocations independently." He had also figured it out. She had expected that he might. He was not a man whose operational intelligence was in question. What had been in question from the beginning was whether his ego would allow him to use that intelligence clearly when the situation asked him to choose between his performance and the mission outcome. "I want to propose something," she said, "and I need you to hear it as a genuine tactical proposal, not as a maneuver." He looked at her steadily. "Go ahead. If we coordinate our resource allocations and yield the third objective to a joint resolution instead of pursuing it individually, we can both achieve the first 2 objectives at a higher quality than either of us would achieve them alone. The evaluation isn't scoring who wins the third objective. It's scoring how we handle the conflict between them." Ryan was quiet for 5 seconds. "You think it's a collaboration test?" he said. "I think it's a collaboration test dressed as a competition," she said. "And I think the competitors who recognize that are the ones the evaluators are looking for." Another 4 seconds. "What do you get out of proposing this?" he asked. It wasn't hostile. It was direct, the specific directness of a man who needed to understand motivation before he could commit to a course of action. "The same thing you get," she said. "A result that reflects what I actually think good command looks like. I'm not here to beat you. I'm here to demonstrate who I am under real conditions." Ryan looked at her. She waited. "You know what this looks like from the outside," he said. "The second-place competitor proposing cooperation with the first-place competitor in the decisive phase. I know exactly what it looks like," she said. "It looks like I'm trying to close the gap without earning it through direct competition." "Yes. And yet I'm still proposing it," she said. "Because I think it's the right approach, not the strategic approach, the right one." Ryan's expression shifted. Something changed in his face that was difficult to name and impossible to manufacture, the specific quality of a person whose internal calculus has been disrupted by an input they didn't account for. He had prepared for a competitor. He had spent the night preparing for someone who was going to push against him with everything she had. He had not prepared for someone who, in the decisive moment of the decisive day, was going to tell him the truth about what she thought the situation actually required. "Your father taught you that," he said. The question surprised her. "What?" "The principle behind what you just said, the right approach versus the strategic approach." She was quiet for a moment. "He taught me that they're the same thing," she said. "He believed that in any high-stakes situation, the right approach and the most effective approach ultimately converge. That if you're ever choosing between them, you've probably misread one of the two." Ryan said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at the scenario document. Then he looked back at her. "Joint resolution on Objective 3, he said. "Coordinated allocation on Objectives 1 and 2. "Yes," she said. "We present the proposal to the evaluators together." "Together," she confirmed. He extended his hand across the table. She took it, and in the adjacent viewing corridor, where 2 evaluators were observing through the partition, Hirsch said nothing for a long moment after the handshake. The assistant evaluator looked at him. They both got it, the assistant said. She got it in the review period, Hirsch said. You can tell from the way she opened. He got it fast once she laid it out. He got it fast, Hirsch agreed. But he also could have refused. He could have decided the collaboration framing was a threat to his standing and played it straight as a competition. He paused. It would have been the wrong call, but it would have been the instinctive call for a lot of people in his position. He didn't make it. No, Hirsch said. He didn't. He made a note that was longer than any note he had made in 3 days. The joint presentation to the evaluators lasted 11 minutes. Ryan and Sophia laid out their resource coordination plan, their rationale for the joint objective, 3 resolution, and their proposed execution sequence. They did not perform agreement. There were 2 moments during the presentation where they genuinely disagreed on sequence, addressed the disagreement directly and without performance, and reached a resolution. The evaluators later noted that those 2 moments of managed disagreement were among the most valuable data points of the entire 3-day challenge because genuine disagreement handled with professional directness was harder to manufacture than performed consensus, and far more revealing about command character. When the presentation was finished, Hirsch looked at both of them for a long moment. Questions from the evaluation team, he asked. One of the assistant evaluators, a lieutenant commander named Park, different from the competitor Park, leaned forward. Commander Mitchell, at what point did you recognize the collaboration framing of this phase? Ryan was honest. During Lieutenant Bennett's opening statement, he said, she laid out the resource math, and I understood the implication. And before that, I was reading it as a direct competition, he said. I was preparing to compete for the 3rd objective. What changed your assessment? Ryan looked at the table for a moment, then at Sophia, then back at Park. She was willing to say out loud what the situation actually required, he said, even though saying it out loud gave me the option to use the information against her if I'd chosen to. He paused. That's not strategy. That's character. And in my experience, character is more reliable than strategy in conditions where strategy has run out. The room was very quiet. Hirsch wrote something. Lieutenant Bennett, he said without looking up. Same question. When did you recognize the collaboration framing? 3 minutes into the independent review period, she said. What made you certain enough to propose it openly, rather than attempt to use the information as a competitive advantage? She thought about the answer carefully before she gave it, not because she didn't know it, but because she wanted to say it accurately. Because the situation was asking something specific, she said. Not who could win against the other person, who could recognize what the situation actually needed and have the willingness to propose it when it was uncomfortable to do so. She paused. If I'd used that information competitively instead of openly, I might have gained a tactical advantage in this phase, but I would have answered the wrong question. And I came here to answer the right one. Hirsch looked up from his notes. He looked at Sophia for a long moment, then at Ryan. Then he closed his notebook. Thank you both, he said. Outside the session room, the tension that had been building through the morning found its outlet in the only way it could, through the conversations of the 200 soldiers who had been watching without being able to see, who had heard second-hand reports of what was unfolding in the assessment area, and who were now in the specific state of suspended animation that exists when people know something significant has happened, but don't yet know the full shape of it. Voss was in the outer corridor when Ryan and Sophia came out of the session room together. He saw them emerge side by side. Something about that image, Ryan Mitchell and Sophia Bennett side by side, not as adversaries, but as 2 people who had just been through something real together, stopped him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Ryan noticed Voss in the corridor. He looked at the young operator for a moment. You competed today? Ryan asked. Yes, sir. Eliminated after Phase 2. Ryan nodded. How'd you do on Phase 2? Voss hesitated. I made a fast decision, he said. But I'm not sure I made a full one. Ryan looked at him. Difference matters, Ryan said. Learn it. He walked on. Voss turned to look at Sophia, who had watched the exchange. He's different, Voss said. He's the same, Sophia said. The intelligence was always there. He just turned it in a different direction. Voss thought about that. Is that what you were doing? He asked. Turning it, She considered the question seriously because it deserved a serious answer. "No," she said. "I was just competing. What he turned himself." She picked up her bag. "That's the only way it works." The final scoring and evaluation compilation took until 1700. The 12 competitors assembled in the main briefing room, and Weston stood at the front with Hirsch and 2 other senior evaluators, and the specific expression of someone who had seen a great deal and had arrived at a conclusion. "Day 3 of this challenge," Weston began, "has produced the most complex evaluation record in the 11 years I have been associated with this event." He did not say it as a compliment to any individual. He said it as a statement of fact. The multi-phase integrated assessment format was designed specifically to surface qualities that standard category-based evaluation misses. It is not a comfortable format. It is not a format that rewards people who planned for a comfortable challenge. He paused. It is a format that rewards people who prepared for the real one. He looked at the 12 faces. "First place overall," he said. "Commander Ryan Mitchell." Ryan received it with a nod. No celebration, just a nod. Which was itself different from the Ryan Mitchell who had walked into this facility 3 days ago, who would have received that result with the specific expansive confidence of a man confirming what he already knew. "Second place overall," Weston said. "Lieutenant Sophia Bennett." The room did something that briefing rooms at competition debriefs almost never did. It produced a sound, not applause, exactly, because that wasn't the protocol, but the specific involuntary exhalation of a large number of people simultaneously releasing breath they had been holding without realizing it. The sound of a conclusion that had been suspended for 3 days, finally resolving. Sophia received the result the same way she had received everything else this week. Steadily, without performance, with the specific composure of someone for whom the result was important, but was not ultimately the point. "I also want to note for the record," Weston said, which was not a standard element of the debrief. When Weston said, "I want to note for the record," in a setting like this, the room understood it to mean something was happening outside the normal parameters. That the Phase 3 joint session produced an evaluation record that the full evaluation team has agreed to designate as a reference document for future challenge design. He looked at Ryan, then at Sophia. The ability to recognize what a situation actually requires above and beyond what competition demands is the rarest quality this challenge has ever been designed to surface. He paused. "Both of you demonstrated it today. The first place result stands on the full composite. But what happened in Phase 3 will be taught." He closed his briefing materials. The room stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual. Then Ryan Mitchell did something that the people in that room would talk about for years. He stood up. He turned to Sophia, who was 2 seats to his right. He looked at her directly with the full, unguarded directness of a man who had spent 3 days being changed by something he hadn't expected, and had finally arrived at the moment of acknowledging it. "Lieutenant Bennett," he said. The room was absolutely still. "I owe you something I should have said on day 1, he said. "And I didn't. And I want to say it now in front of the same people who heard what I said at the competitor board." He didn't look away from her. "I was wrong. About what I said. About what I assumed. And about what I thought strength looked like before I watched you show me something I hadn't seen before." Sophia looked at him. The room waited. "Thank you, Commander," she said, "for saying it." She paused. "And for what you did in Phase 3. You could have played it differently. You chose not to." "You gave me the opportunity to choose," he said. "That matters." It was the quietest room that Iron Harbor's briefing center had held in 11 years. And in that quiet, something shifted that was larger than 2 people, and larger than one competition, and larger than the result on any score sheet. Something that had to do with what strength actually looked like when you stripped away everything that wasn't it, and what was left was just 2 people who had gone through something real and come out the other side knowing things they hadn't known before. The room emptied slowly after the debrief, the way rooms empty when the people inside them aren't quite ready to let go of what just happened. They moved toward the doors in small clusters, speaking in the lowered voices of people still processing something that hadn't finished settling yet. Nobody rushed. Even the people who had somewhere to be seemed to find reasons to take slightly longer than necessary. Ryan Mitchell was the last to stand. He gathered his materials with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with the materials themselves. The notebook, the pen, the folded scenario documents, he collected each of them. The way a person collects their thoughts one at a time, buying himself the specific kind of time that isn't about time at all. Sophia was near the door when he called her name. "Lieutenant Bennett." She turned. He crossed the room toward her, and the three people still in the space, Garrett near the back wall, Hirsch at the side table packing evaluation materials, and Voss, who had no official reason to still be there, but had somehow never left. All became very still in the particular way of people who understand that what they are about to witness is not meant for them, and yet cannot bring themselves to leave. Ryan stopped 2 feet in front of her. "I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee," he said, "if you're willing." It was such a plain human request that for a moment it sat in the air between them, like something slightly incongruous with everything that had preceded it. 3 days of competition, a morning of reckoning, a debrief room full of held breath and released pressure. Sophia looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. They walked out together. Garrett watched them go. Then he looked at Hirsch. Hirsch was looking at the door they'd walked through with the expression of a man filing something carefully in a part of his memory he intended to keep. "First time I've ever seen that happen after a final debrief," Garrett said. "Yes," Hirsch said. "Is it going to matter the coffee?" Hirsch closed his evaluation bag. "Everything that happened in this building over the last 3 days is going to matter," he said. "Some of it in ways we can measure, some of it in ways we won't see for years." He picked up his bag. "The coffee especially." He walked out. Garrett stood alone in the empty briefing room for a moment. Then he smiled, not the smile of someone who found something funny, but the smile of someone who had watched something rare and knew it. The facility had a small staff dining space that stayed open late on challenge days, staffed by a single cook who had been there longer than most of the instructors and who had developed the specific philosophical patience of someone who has watched a great many things happen without ever being in the center of them. He brought 2 cups without being asked when Ryan and Sophia sat down, because he had learned to read the difference between people who needed service and people who needed space, and these two needed both. They sat across from each other with the coffees between them for a moment before either spoke. Ryan got there first. "I read the evaluator reports," he said. "Tuesday night, after our conversation in the corridor." Sophia looked at him. "Which ones?" "All of them. Years 2 through 8. Didn't finish until 2 in the morning." She said nothing, waiting. "I've been competing in this challenge for 6 years," he said. "I've won it 3 times. I have never once looked at an evaluator report." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "You knew something about this challenge that I didn't know. Not because you had access to information I didn't have, because you looked for information I didn't bother to look for." "You had the access," she said. "The reports are in the reference archive. Anyone can pull them." "I know that now. What did you find?" she asked, not to make a point, genuinely asking. "The pattern," he said. "The people who win this challenge across multiple years, they're not always the strongest competitors on individual events. They're the people who understand the challenge as a system, who understand what the evaluators are actually measuring versus what the challenge appears to be measuring." He paused. "I've been winning on individual event dominance for 3 years, which works until it runs into someone who understands the system." "You still won," she said. "By a margin that should have been wider," he said. "And I know it. And more importantly," he stopped. "More importantly, I know why it wasn't." The coffee sat between them, and the dining space was quiet, and outside, the facility was doing its end-of-day routine. The sounds of an operational environment winding down equipment being secured, voices in the distance that carried the specific tonality of people at the end of a significant day. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said. "Yes. Why did you put your name on the list?" He said it directly, without the inflection that would have made it a challenge. "Not the official reason, the real one." Sophia considered it. "Because I needed to know," she said. "Know what? Whether what I'd built was real." She turned the cup slightly in her hands. "I've been qualifying and proving and demonstrating for so long that I wasn't sure anymore whether I was genuinely capable or whether I was just good at qualifying. Those are different things. I needed an environment that couldn't be managed, that would show me the actual answer. Ryan was quiet. And, he said. And I'm still not entirely sure, she said, which is probably the honest answer. But I know more than I knew 3 days ago. He looked at her for a moment. You're second in the most competitive evaluation in this facility, he said, in your first attempt, against people who've been here for years. Second, she said, not first. Second to a man who... He stopped himself, tried again. Second to someone who had to work harder than he's worked in 6 years to hold that margin. He said it without self-congratulation. He said it like a fact that existed in the world and needed to be acknowledged. That's not a small thing. I know, she said. But I also know what Phase 3 actually showed, and it wasn't who won on composite scoring. No, he agreed. It wasn't. They were quiet for a moment. Then Ryan said something that he had clearly been building toward since before the coffee, since before the end of the debrief, possibly since somewhere in the middle of the night before, when he had been reading reports with the specific focus of a man in the early stages of changing his mind about something important. I said something at that board on day 1 that I can't take back, he said. I know that. There are soldiers at this facility who heard it and who are going to carry it in ways that are going to affect how they think about what's possible and what isn't. That's a thing I did, and I can't undo it. He looked at the cup. But I've been trying to figure out what I can do. Sophia listened without interrupting. I want to request that you be involved in the next qualification assessment cycle, he said, officially, in a leadership capacity, not as a candidate, as an evaluator and advisor. He looked up at her. I have the authority to make that request to the command and to support it with the evaluation record from this challenge, if you're willing. Sophia held his gaze. That's not a small thing either, she said. No, he said. It isn't. Why? She asked. Same word she'd used in the outline she had built in her mind of who Ryan Mitchell was. The question that cut to the center of motivation faster than any other. Why now? Why me specifically? Because the best argument I can make with actions is a better argument than anything I could say with words, he said. And because you showed me something in Phase 3 that I want other people to see, not the result, the thinking behind the result. He paused. The soldiers who heard me at that board, if some of them later see you in an evaluator's role on a formal qualification cycle that says something different than anything I could announce at a formation. She understood what he was saying. He was right that it said something different. He was also right that it was a better argument than words. He was offering her leverage she hadn't asked for in a form that would actually move things, which was the specific kind of offer that came from someone who had done the real work of thinking about how change actually happened rather than how it was announced. I'll consider it, she said. I need to talk to my chain of command first. Of course. And I have one condition, she said. He waited. If I'm in an evaluation role in that cycle, I'm in it as an evaluator, not as a demonstration, not as a visible statement about integration, as a person doing a job at the standard the job requires. She said it without heat, but with the specific clarity of someone who had spent years navigating the space between being used as a symbol and being treated as a professional. The moment I become a message instead of an evaluator, the whole thing loses its value for the candidates, for the facility, and for whatever you're actually trying to accomplish. Ryan looked at her steadily. Agreed, he said, without reservation. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. And for a few minutes, they sat in the quiet of a shared table and drank coffee like two people who had traveled a significant distance together and had arrived somewhere neither of them had expected when they started. What happened next? The part of the story that the 500 soldiers at Iron Harbor would eventually learn in pieces through the specific informal distribution network of a tight professional community began the following morning and unfolded over the next 72 hours with the cumulative weight of a decision that had been made cleanly and fully, and without any of the hedging that usually softened the impact of things that mattered. Ryan Mitchell submitted the formal request to the command at 0800. It was 4 pages. The evaluation record from the challenge was attached as supporting documentation. He had written it the night before after the coffee in the same hours he had used on the 2 nights prior to study evaluator reports, which told anyone who knew him that the hours after midnight were now being used differently than they had been used for years. The request landed on Captain Weston's desk at 08:15. Weston read it through without stopping. Then he read it through again. Then he called his administrative chief and told her to hold his 9 o'clock. He called Ryan at 08:45. "I've read it," Weston said. "Yes, sir." "It's well argued." "Thank you, sir." A pause. "Ryan." Weston's voice shifted slightly, not to informality exactly, but to the specific register of a senior person speaking to someone they respect, without the layers of protocol between them. "I want to ask you something directly." "Yes, sir." "Is this coming from what happened in that room yesterday? Or is it coming from something you've been thinking about before this week?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He gave the question the honest consideration it deserved. "Both," he said finally. "What happened in that room clarified something I should have been thinking about before this week. I wasn't." A pause. "That's on me." Weston was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "I'll take it to the command group." "How long?" "A week, maybe less given the evaluation record wait." "Thank you, sir." The call ended. Ryan sat in his office and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He thought about his own history at Iron Harbor, not with pride, but with the specific, honest scrutiny of someone taking inventory. How many conversations at that competitor board over the years had shaped what people believed was possible for them? How many times had he made a casual comment, the kind that felt throwaway in the moment? The kind a person with authority makes without thinking about the weight that authority gives to throwaway comments that had attached itself to someone younger and changed the direction they were willing to try. He didn't have the answers to those questions. But he had the questions now, which was different from not having had them before. Sophia found out about the request from Garrett, who had it from one of Hirsch's staff, which was exactly how information moved at Iron Harbor. Garrett came to find her in the equipment room where she was completing her post-challenge gear check, a systematic process she did after every operational period, methodical and specific, because her father had told her that how you handled your equipment after the hard thing was done was a direct reflection of how seriously you took the next hard thing. "Mitchell submitted a formal request to Weston this morning," Garrett said, without preamble, because he had understood in 3 days of working beside Sophia that she preferred direct information to framed information. She kept checking her equipment. "I know," she said. Garrett blinked. "You knew before I got here." "He told me he was going to," she said, "last night." Garrett processed that. "And you're not surprised, not more than you're showing." "I'm not more than I am showing," she said. "He's doing what he said he was going to do. That's not surprising. That's character." "Most people in his position wouldn't have submitted it," Garrett said. "You know that, right? Most people in his position would have had the coffee, made the gesture, and then quietly not followed through because the professional cost of formally advocating for someone who just came second to them is non-trivial," she said. "Significant," he said. "It's significant. It puts his credibility behind a request that some people in that command group are going to read as him advocating for a diversity initiative rather than a performance-based decision. Which is exactly why he needs the evaluation record attached," she said, "and why he attached it." Garrett watched her continue her gear check. "You had this all figured out," he said. She looked up at him. "I didn't have anything figured out," she said. "I made a decision in Phase 3 based on what I thought the situation required. The rest of this is other people making their own decisions." She paused. "I can't figure out what other people are going to decide. I can only control what I put in front of them to decide about." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Your father teach you that too?" he asked. "In about 100 different ways," she said. "Over about 20 years." She closed the equipment case. "What are you going to do if the command group approves it?" Garrett asked. "Accept it," she said. "Do the job." "And if they don't?" She picked up the case. "Come back the next year," she said simply. "And the year after that. Until the record is long enough that the decision makes itself." Garrett looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of any of this," he said. "Not as a question, as a statement of something he had been trying to confirm for 3 days and had now confirmed. "I'm afraid of plenty of things," she said. "I'm afraid of not being good enough, of having a bad day on the day that matters, of missing something in my preparation that someone else caught." She paused. "But I'm not afraid of the process. The process is just what it is. You work it." She walked out. Garrett stood in the equipment room alone. Then he shook his head slowly, the way people shake their heads when they've been in the presence of something they can't fully explain but recognize completely. The command group met on Friday, which was 48 hours after the challenge had concluded, and 32 hours after Ryan's request landed on Weston's desk. There were 6 people in the room. Weston Hirsch, the facility's executive officer, Commander Samuels, the senior enlisted advisor, Master Chief Kowalski, and 2 representatives from the broader Naval Special Warfare Command structure who had been at Iron Harbor for an unrelated administrative review and whose presence in the building meant they were in the room. Weston presented the request and the supporting documentation without editorializing. He had made a career of presenting complex situations clearly and letting the evidence carry its own weight, and this situation had enough evidence that editorializing would have diminished it. Hirsch spoke when Weston invited him. "The evaluation record is unusual," Hirsch said. "I've been a senior evaluator for this challenge for 4 years. In that time, I've seen strong individual performances. I've seen exceptional physical results. I've seen good tactical decision-making. What I have not seen prior to this week is the kind of integrated performance across all evaluation categories that Lieutenant Bennett produced in 3 days." He paused. "And I want to be specific about what I mean by integrated, because I'm not talking about being good at multiple things. I'm talking about a coherent operating philosophy expressed consistently across every context the challenge put her in, from orienteering route decisions on day 1 to the Phase 3 joint session on day 3. It's the same approach, the same structure of thinking applied differently each time. That's not a range of skills, that's a person." Yermand. The room was quiet. One of the Naval Special Warfare representatives, a captain named Doherty, who had been in the community for 26 years and had the specific measured quality of someone who had seen enough that very little surprised him, spoke. "The request comes from Commander Mitchell," he said. "Yes, sir," Weston said. "His evaluation record at this facility is well established." "Correct. And he's requesting this based on what he observed during the challenge." "Based on the evaluation record and his direct observation, yes." Doherty looked at the documentation in front of him. "Mitchell's record makes him a credible advocate," he said. "I'll say that plainly. If this request came from a different source, I'd be asking more questions." He paused. "The documentation supports it independently, but his credibility is an additional factor." Samuel spoke for the first time. "My concern is the optics question," he said. It was the question that had been in the room since Weston started talking, and that everyone had been waiting for someone to name. If we approve this, and it's perceived as a response to Mitchell's public comment on day 1, as a corrective gesture rather than a merit-based decision, it undermines the legitimacy of the appointment for everyone involved, including Lieutenant Bennett. "That's her concern too," Weston said. "She made it explicitly to Mitchell before he submitted the request. Her condition for accepting is that she's brought in as an evaluator doing a job, not as a demonstration." Samuels looked at him. "She put that condition on it." According to Mitchell's account of the conversation. Samuels was quiet for a moment. Kowalski, the senior enlisted advisor, had not spoken yet. He spoke rarely in command group sessions, which meant that when he did, the room tended to listen with a particular quality of attention. "I've been at this facility for 9 years, he said. "I've watched a lot of people come through this challenge, some of them with talent that didn't get the traction it deserved because the environment wasn't ready for them." He looked at the documentation. The evaluation record is the evaluation record. The command group's job is to make a decision about whether to act on it. In my view, the question isn't whether she's qualified for this role. The record answers that. He paused. The question is whether this command group is willing to act on what the record says, or whether we're going to require a longer runway of proof than we'd require from anyone else in an equivalent record position. The room was silent for a moment. Doherty looked at Weston. "Call the vote," he said. The vote was 5-1. The dissenting vote was Samuel's, who put his objection formally on record as relating to timing rather than merit. He believed a 60-day waiting period would provide appropriate professional distance from the challenge events and reduce the optics concern. He was outvoted and accepted the outcome with the clean professionalism of a person who understood that his job was to raise the concern, not to require that it be resolved his way. Weston called Ryan first. "The command group approved the request," Weston said. 5-1. Samuels abstained on timing grounds, not merit. "Understood," Ryan said. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. The record did the work." "The record exists because she performed," Ryan said. "I want that on the record too. This isn't about me advocating. It's about a performance record that should have produced this result without a formal request needing to be made." Weston was quiet for a beat. "That observation," he said carefully, "is going into my own notes, separately from the formal record." "It should," Ryan said. Weston called Sophia 20 minutes later. She was in the middle of a run, her standard post-challenge recovery protocol, which was a light run at a pace that served as active recovery rather than training, and she took the call on her earpiece and kept moving. "Lieutenant Bennett," Weston said. "The command group has approved Commander Mitchell's request." She kept her pace steady. "The role is advisory evaluator for the next qualification assessment cycle. Start date to be determined pending your chain of command coordination. The formal appointment letter will come through official channels within the week." "Yes, sir," she said. "I have one thing to add," Weston said. "Off record." "Yes, sir. In 11 years of this challenge, I have watched a great many things happen that I thought were significant in the moment, and that turned out to be less significant in retrospect. And I have occasionally watched things happen that looked smaller than they were in the moment, and that turned out to be larger in retrospect." He paused. "I don't know yet which category this week falls into, but I know which direction I'm leaning." "Thank you, sir," she said. "Carry on, Lieutenant." The call ended. She ran another 2 miles before she stopped. When she stopped, she stood still for a moment with the specific inner quiet of someone who has been working toward a thing for a long time and has just watched a door open that they weren't certain was going to open. She didn't celebrate. She stood there and breathed, and then she thought about her father, not with grief, not with longing, but with the specific warmth of someone who knows that a person they love would understand this moment without needing it explained. "Let your actions answer," he had told her. She had been answering for years. The answer was starting to arrive. That evening in the facility common area, something happened that nobody organized and nobody announced. A group of soldiers gathered not at a table, not in a formation, just in the common space, the way people gather when there's no structure, but there's something that needs to be present together for a while. Voss was there. Garrett was there. Tran and Kerrigan Ryan's former students were there. A handful of operators who had competed, and others who had only watched, and a few staff members who had been peripheral to the events of the week in official terms, but had not been peripheral to them in any other sense. Ryan Mitchell walked in at 19:30. He got a coffee. He sat down at the edge of the group. Nobody made it a formal thing. Nobody stood up and made a speech. The conversation moved the way conversations move in groups of people who share a reference point tangentially with humor at the edges, with the serious material handled sideways because that was how the community had always handled serious material. At some point, Tran said not to Ryan specifically, but into the general conversation. "That Phase 3 call was something I'm still thinking about." A few people nodded. "The coordination move," someone said. "The willingness to propose it," Tran said. Either of them could have played it differently. Neither of them did. Ryan said nothing. Voss, who was at the far end of the table and had been quiet in the way of someone who had things to say, but was being careful about saying them, spoke. "I've been thinking about what it takes to get to the place where you can do that," he said. "Where you can see what a situation actually needs, and then actually say it out loud, even when it's uncomfortable." "Confidence," someone offered. "Not just confidence," Voss said. "Because you can be confident and still choose the comfortable move." He thought for a moment. It's more like being willing to be wrong in front of people, proposing something risky and accepting that it might not land. The table was quiet for a moment. Ryan looked at his coffee. "It's also about what you've decided you're competing for," he said. The table turned toward him. He hadn't meant to speak loudly, and he hadn't, but the room had gotten quiet enough that it didn't need to be loud. "If you're competing to be seen as the best, you make the move that protects that," he said. "If you're competing to produce the best outcome, you make the move the situation asks for, even if it looks like it costs you something." He paused. "The difference between those two things is the difference between what I thought I was doing this week and what I learned I was actually doing." The table was very still. "What changed?" Garrett asked, quietly, without pressure. Ryan considered it honestly. "Someone showed me a longer game," he said, "and I realized I'd been winning a shorter one and calling it the whole thing." Voss looked at him. Then he took out his notebook. He wrote something down. He didn't explain what. He didn't need to. And in the quiet of that common area with coffee in their hands, and the facility doing its night sounds around them, a group of soldiers who had come to Iron Harbor expecting a competition found themselves at the end of a week that had given them something considerably more difficult to describe, but considerably more worth having. 6 weeks after Iron Harbor, the formal appointment letter arrived. Sophia read it once, folded it, and put it in the same drawer where she kept her qualification certificate and the single handwritten note her father had given her the morning she left for SEAL training, a note that said nothing more than, "Do the work, let it speak." She did not frame these things. She did not display them. They lived in a drawer because they were private, and because she had learned a long time ago that the things worth keeping were worth keeping quietly. She reported to Iron Harbor in an official evaluator capacity on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, and the first person she saw when she walked through the main operational entrance was Voss. He had been assigned to the facility as a junior training cadre member 3 weeks earlier, a rotation his command had approved based on his challenge performance, and she suspected, based on a word that had been put in the right ear by someone with enough standing to put words in ears. He was standing near the scheduling board with a clipboard and the specific expression of someone who is new enough to still find the logistics of a large operational facility slightly overwhelming and experienced enough to not let that show. He saw her and straightened. "Lieutenant Bennett," he said. "Voss?" She looked at the clipboard. "Scheduling. Trying to be," he said. "The system has 3 different versions of the Week 3 rotation, and none of them match the physical availability of the ranges. Which version does Petty Officer Chen think is correct?" Voss blinked. "How did you know Chen was the one managing range availability?" "Because Chen managed range availability during the challenge and was the best at it," she said simply. "Find the person who's best at the thing. Ask them first. Don't spend 40 minutes working backward from 3 conflicting documents." Voss looked at the clipboard. Then he set it down. "I'll find Chen," he said. "Good," she said, and walked on. That was the first morning. The qualification assessment cycle was scheduled to run 8 weeks, with 2 cohorts of candidates rotating through compressed evaluation periods. Her role was advisory evaluator. She sat in on scenario assessments, contributed written analysis to the evaluation record, and participated in the daily debrief sessions where the evaluation team reconciled observations and built the composite picture of each candidate. It was detailed work. It required a quality of attention that most people underestimated until they were inside it, the specific discipline of watching other people perform under pressure without projecting onto them. What you would do in their position of seeing each candidate as they actually were, rather than as the version of them that fit your existing mental category. Sophia was good at it. She had always been good at watching without projecting. Her father had called it clear seeing, the ability to observe something as it was, rather than as you expected it to be, and he had told her it was the rarest quality in operational medicine and probably in everything else as well. Ryan Mitchell was at the facility for the first 2 weeks of the cycle. His presence was not part of the original plan. He had a standing quarterly review during that period that required him to be in the building for unrelated administrative reasons. But the practical effect was that he and Sophia were in the same operational space for 14 days, which was enough time for the people at Iron Harbor to observe something that quietly reconfigured how several of them thought about several things. They were professional. They were correct. They were, to anyone watching from a distance, simply two people with different roles in the same evaluation process who communicated efficiently and without friction. But the people watching from close range Hirsch, who was the cycle's lead evaluator. Garrett, who had been attached to the facility for the cycle as a training support member. Kowalski, the senior enlisted advisor who noticed everything and commented on very little. Those people saw something different. They saw two people who had gone through a genuine reckoning together and come out the other side with the specific quality of mutual respect that couldn't be manufactured and couldn't be performed, and was immediately recognizable to anyone who had ever experienced it themselves. The first significant moment of the 8-week cycle happened on day 9. There was a candidate, a lieutenant named Harmon, 26 years old, third attempt at the qualification assessment, who had performed well on the physical and tactical elements, but was showing a consistent pattern in the leadership scenarios that the evaluation team had been tracking and hadn't yet named precisely. Sophia named it in the day 9 debrief. "He's performing leadership," she said. "He knows what leadership is supposed to look like from the outside, and he's reproducing that appearance very accurately. But when the scenario introduces variables that his performance template doesn't have a prepared response for, there's a gap." Hirsch looked at his notes. "Walk me through the specific observation." "Scenario 4 transitioned between Phase 2 and Phase 3, she said. The evaluator introduced an unexpected personnel accountability issue. Harmon's response was textbook. He used the correct language, made the correct sequence of decisions, maintained the correct command posture. She paused. But the speed was wrong. Too slow, too fast, she said. He got to the textbook response before he could have actually processed the specific parameters of this particular accountability issue. He had a template, and he ran the template. The template happened to be correct for this scenario. In a different scenario, with different parameters, the template would have failed, and he wouldn't have known why because he never actually read the specific situation. He read the category the situation belonged to. The room was quiet. Hirsch looked at the Day 9 footage notes. "That's a distinction most evaluators don't catch," he said. "It's the distinction between training that produces pattern recognition and training that produces genuine situational assessment," she said. "Pattern recognition is faster and works well when the situation fits the pattern. When it doesn't fit, you need the deeper thing. We don't know yet whether Harmon has the deeper thing because we haven't seen a scenario that required it." Hirsch looked at his co-evaluator. "Design one," he said. The scenario was run on day 11. It was deliberately constructed to be close to Harmon's existing template categories, but with specific sub-parameters that the template couldn't fully address the operational equivalent of a familiar door with a different lock. If Harmon was genuinely reading situations, he would slow down, notice the mismatch, and adapt. If he was running templates, he would apply the closest matching response, and either not notice the gap or notice it too late. He noticed the gap. That was the thing that mattered. He caught it mid-execution, stopped himself, and recalibrated in real time. It was imperfect. He lost 30 seconds that cost him on timing. But 30 seconds of honest recalibration was worth more than a clean run on a template that had stopped matching reality. Sophia wrote in her evaluation notes, "Candidate demonstrated capacity for genuine situational assessment when template failed. Recalibration was slow, but authentic. This is the trainable version of the problem. Recommend advancement with specific coaching focus on accelerating the gap recognition response." Hirsch read her notes after the debrief. He read them twice. Then he signed them without revision, which was the evaluator equivalent of a standing ovation. Ryan saw the notes on day 12 when Hirsch shared the day 11 evaluation summary with the senior staff. He read Sophia's section. He didn't say anything during the briefing, but afterward in the corridor outside the briefing room he stopped Sophia. "Your Harmon assessment," he said. "Yes." "The template observation." He paused. "I've been watching candidates in this facility for 6 years. I have never articulated that distinction in those terms." She looked at him. "It's something my father described once," she said, "about field medicine. The difference between a medic who knows trauma protocols and a medic who reads the actual patient in front of them." She paused. He said the second one keeps people alive when the first one's protocol runs out. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Your father, he said. What was his name? David Bennett. Master Chief retired. Ryan looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something close to recognition, but surprised recognition, the kind that comes when a name connects to a memory you didn't know you were carrying. David Bennett, he said slowly. From the Pacific team. Early 2000s. She went still. You knew him. I was a very junior operator, Ryan said. He was senior enlisted on a training rotation I was part of in my second year. I was 22. He stopped. He was the most competent person I'd encountered in the community up to that point. He had this quality of seeing through the noise directly to what was actually happening. Sophia looked at him. Clear seeing, she said quietly. Ryan blinked. That's what he called it, she said. Ryan said nothing for a moment. The corridor was empty around them, and the facility was doing its mid-morning operational routine, and the distance between the person Ryan Mitchell had been on day one of the challenge and the person standing in this corridor saying nothing, while he processed the specific weight of what he'd just learned, was a distance that had no clean measurement, but was absolutely real. He was a good man, Ryan said finally. He was, she said. He would have... Ryan stopped, started again. He would have been very proud of this week. I know, she said. That's the hardest part sometimes. Not the work, the wishing he could see it. Ryan nodded. He didn't have words for it, and he didn't try to find them, which was the right call because some things don't benefit from being put into words, and this was one of them. They stood in the corridor for a moment longer. Then they went back to work. The twist that Iron Harbor had not anticipated the thing that nobody on the command group had predicted when they approved the appointment, and nobody in the evaluation team had discussed, and that arrived in week 5, with the specific unexpectedness of things that in retrospect seem inevitable, was that Sophia's presence changed the candidates. Not because she gave inspirational speeches, she didn't. Not because she told her story to the cohorts. She explicitly declined when a junior staff member suggested it, saying, "The candidates need to see performance, not biography. If my biography is what motivates them, it'll run out. If my standard is what they learn from it, won't." She changed them by being present in the evaluator role, and doing it exactly as she had demanded from the beginning as a person doing a job at the standard the job required. But candidates noticed things. They always did. They were in a high-attention state by the nature of their situation, alert to every signal in their environment, and the signal that Sophia transmitted by existing in that evaluator chair, and reading their performance with the specific clarity and fairness that she brought to every assessment. That signal reached them in ways they couldn't have fully articulated, but that showed up in their behavior. The cohort in week 5 produced the highest composite evaluation scores of any assessment cycle in 3 years. Hirsch brought this to Weston's attention quietly. Weston looked at the numbers. Correlation or causation? He asked. I can't prove causation, Hirsch said. What I can tell you is that I've run 6 of these cycles, and I have never seen a cohort push this hard on the leadership and decision-making categories specifically. The physical numbers are normal. The tactical numbers are slightly above average. The leadership assessment scores are... He paused. They're the highest I've recorded. Weston looked at him. What's different about the leadership assessment environment this cycle? He asked. Hirsch gave him the honest answer. The evaluator they're performing in front of, he said. Weston was quiet. Put that in the cycle review document, he said, formally. Yes, sir. The cycle review document went to the Naval Special Warfare Command structure at the end of week 8. It was a standard administrative report on paper. Inside it contained Hirsch's observation about the leadership assessment scores attributed to the evaluation environment, which was the careful professional language of a formal document that pointed at something real without overstating what could be proven. Doherty, the Naval Special Warfare captain, who had been in the command group vote, read the cycle review document on a Thursday morning at his desk 3,000 miles from Iron Harbor. He read the leadership assessment section twice. Then he made a call. The call was to his counterpart at a different Naval Special Warfare training facility, a facility that had been discussing for the better part of 18 months how to address persistent gaps in their own leadership assessment outcomes, gaps that multiple review cycles had identified, and multiple proposed interventions had failed to close. "I'm sending you something," Doherty said. "A cycle review document from Iron Harbor." "What am I looking at?" "An approach to evaluation environment that produced results I haven't seen in a while," Doherty said. "Read the leadership section specifically." "Is this about the Bennett situation?" Doherty paused. "It's about the evaluation record," he said. "The Bennett situation is what produced the evaluation record." There was a pause on the other end. "Send it," his counterpart said. The document moved. That was how things moved in the community. Not through announcements, not through policy memos, not through the formal channels that were designed for it, but through the informal network of people who trusted each other's judgment and paid attention to each other's results. Slowly, and then all at once, the way water finds its level. Sophia didn't know about Doherty's call when it happened. She found out 6 weeks later when she received a formal inquiry from a second facility asking whether she would be available for a consulting role in the design of their next assessment cycle. She was in her team's planning room when the inquiry came through, sitting across the table from a senior chief named Marcus, who had been her primary operational partner for the previous 3 months, and who had the specific quality of someone who had earned every year of his experience and wore it without display. She handed him the inquiry. He read it. He handed it back. "You're going to say yes," he said. "I'm going to talk to my chain of command," she said. "And then you're going to say yes." She looked at him. "Probably," she said. Marcus picked up his coffee. "Your father would say yes," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You knew my father." "Overlapped with him for about 8 months in the Pacific long time ago." He looked at his coffee. "He was the kind of man who understood that the work was bigger than any individual job he was assigned to. That what you built was worth more than what you accomplished personally." The room was quiet. "He talked about you," Marcus said, "in the way fathers talk about daughters when they're trying to contain how proud they are." Sophia looked at the table. She said nothing for a long moment. "He would say yes," she said finally. "Yes," Marcus said. "He would." She said yes. The consulting role led to a formal position on an Interfacility Evaluation Standards Working Group, a body that had been trying to standardize leadership assessment methodology across the Naval Special Warfare Training Enterprise for 4 years with inconsistent results. Sophia joined it 8 months after Iron Harbor, the youngest member by 6 years, and the only woman which she noted and did not comment on because her job was not to comment on the composition of the room. Her job was to do the work at the standard the work required. She did. Within 3 months, she had produced a frameworks document on leadership assessment methodology that synthesized the pattern observations she had developed through the Challenge the Evaluation cycle and the subsequent consulting work into a coherent structure that the working group could actually use. Not an inspiration document, an operational tool. Hirsch, who had been brought in as an external reviewer for the working group's output, read the frameworks document over a weekend. He called her on Monday morning. "This is the document I didn't know I was waiting for," he said. "It has gaps," she said. "Of course it has gaps. Everything real has gaps. The gaps in this document are the gaps of honest work, not the gaps of incomplete thinking." He paused. "This is going to change how this community evaluates leadership, not immediately, not loudly, but it will change it." She didn't respond immediately. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, "and I want you to take the question seriously." "All right. When you were in Phase 3 sitting across the table from Mitchell, and you made the decision to propose the collaboration frame openly, did you know in that moment that it was going to change anything beyond the scenario?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I knew it was the right call for the situation in front of me. I didn't know it would become anything else." "But it did," he said. "It did," she agreed. "Does that change how you think about that decision, knowing now what it led to?" She took her time with this one. "No," she said finally. "Because if I'd made that decision because of what it might lead to, it wouldn't have been the same decision. It would have been a performance of the right decision for strategic reasons. And that's not..." She stopped. Found the right words. That's not the thing itself. The thing itself is making the call, because it's the right call in that situation, with those stakes for those reasons. The fact that it turned into something larger is separate. Real, but separate. Hirsch was quiet for a moment. "Your father's daughter," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's always been the goal." Ryan Mitchell heard about the frameworks document from Weston, who sent him a copy with a single line. "You should read this. You'll know why." He read it on a Sunday evening, and he read it the way he had read the evaluator reports that first night straight through without stopping, with the specific quality of attention you bring to something that is giving you information you actually need. When he finished, he sat with it for a while. Then he typed a message. It said, "The Harmon distinction, pages 12 through 14. This is what I spent 20 years not being able to say. You said it." She read the message the next morning. She typed back, "You spent 20 years understanding it. That's why you could recognize it when you saw it written." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, the message said, "I'm proposing a joint session between the working group methodology and the Iron Harbor training curriculum, if you're willing to co-present. Your framework, my operational history. I think the combination is stronger than either alone." She looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed, "Yes." The joint session happened 4 months later. 43 training staff and evaluators from 3 Naval Special Warfare facilities. Ryan presented the operational context. Sophia presented the framework. They had divided the material cleanly, each staying in their lane of deepest expertise. And when the 2 lanes needed to intersect, they intersected naturally without rehearsal, because they had built enough of a shared language over the preceding year that the intersection was genuine. At the end of the session, a senior chief from one of the visiting facilities, a man who had been in the community for 20 years, and whose expression throughout the session had been the careful neutral of someone reserving judgment, raised his hand. "Question for Lieutenant Bennett," he said. "Yes," she said. "The framework you've built here, the distinction between pattern recognition and genuine situational assessment, how do you train it? Not assess it. Train it." It was the right question. It was the question the framework was designed to point toward, without fully answering, because the answer required a full training curriculum and not a methodology document, and that curriculum didn't exist yet. "That's the next problem," she said directly. "The framework identifies what we're looking for and how to recognize it. The training design question is still open." He nodded slowly. "Are you working on it?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Good," he said simply, and sat back. Ryan, standing to her left, said nothing, but she saw the line of his jaw. He was smiling. Not the wide, confident smile of a man performing authority. A quieter thing, the specific expression of someone watching something they had a small part in making possible, and feeling the particular satisfaction of that without needing to claim it. After the session ended, and the room was clearing, Voss, who had made the trip from Iron Harbor as part of the facility's attending delegation, and who had sat in the back row the entire session with his notebook open, found Sophia near the door. He had grown in the months since Iron Harbor. Not just in rank or position, though both of those had moved. Something in the way he carried himself had settled the specific quality of a person who has begun to understand who they are under pressure, and has decided to be that person on purpose. "I've been thinking about something you told me," he said. "Which thing?" she said. "Stop going with the room." He paused. "I've been practicing it." "And it's harder than it sounds," he said. "The pull is it's a real pull. It's not weakness. It's just the room is loud and your own voice is quiet, and sometimes you have to really choose to hear the quiet one." "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it is." "But I'm getting better at it," he said. She looked at him directly. "I can see that," she said. "Keep going." He nodded. He walked away. And Sophia stood in the doorway of a room that had just held 43 people from 3 facilities who were going to carry something back to their teams that would move through their teams in the slow, cumulative way that real things move, not through announcements or ceremonies, but through the daily practice of people who had been given a better tool and were using it. She thought about the competitor board at Iron Harbor. She thought about Ryan's laugh and the crowd, and the 10 feet of space between her and that moment. She thought about her father's note in the drawer. She thought about Phase 3 and the handshake and the coffee and Voss writing in his notebook. She thought about the frameworks document and the working group and the joint session and the senior chief's question. The next problem, still open, already being worked. She thought about how none of it had come from a single dramatic moment of vindication. How it had come from the accumulation of days of preparation and performance and choosing the right call over the comfortable one and doing it again and again and again until the record existed on its own terms and spoke in a voice that didn't require her to raise hers. Her father had told her that the work was the argument. He had been right. He was always right about the things that mattered. She picked up her bag. She walked out into the next day's work. And the strongest proof that she belonged had never been a single moment of triumph over a single man who doubted her. It had been the unbroken line of a person who knew who she was, did what the work required, and refused to stop until the record was too long and too clear and too real for anyone anywhere to honestly argue with.